I was poisoned in a home I was living in, and he'd found one spore of Stachybotrys, just one. And we opened that wall and it was completely black. I hung out a shingle. I thought I was going to represent one or two families. And in the first week, I got 1,000 calls.
Kristina Baehr is a national trial lawyer and founder of Justwell Law, a Princeton and Yale Law graduate. She built her career battling billion-dollar giants and winning. But when tragedy struck her own family, Kristina flipped the script, turning personal pain into a mission for justice. Today, she helps families recover after toxic exposures so they can reclaim their health and rebuild their lives. And she's making history. Just last month, Kristina and her clients became the first to win an environmental injury case against the United States Navy.
They took it on for all of us. Not for themselves, not because they're greedy, but because they care about the world we live in and they care about your children and my children. And they want to make sure that these big builders stop cutting corners. And they want to make sure that the big landlords actually address water damage so that more people don't get sick, so that there are fewer reports of pandas. They are taking a stand for all of us and they're proud of it.
I'd like to give you an opportunity to kind of share your story so people know what got you so passionate about fighting for people's ability to be free from toxins and molds in their own homes.
I was poisoned in a home I was living in. I was sick for years and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and wonderful doctors, well-meaning doctors, even integrative health doctors. And they said, you should reduce stress in your life, maybe change your diet, exercise differently or exercise more. And at the time, I was in big law, working at a wonderful big law firm called McCool Smith, doing high-level patent work. And my brain stopped working. I just couldn't even see straight. And of course, I thought, okay, maybe I will reduce stress in my life. So I left my big firm job. I got a government job, a wonderful job at the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was also a dream to work there. And I was gluten-free and sugar-free and exercising. And I had every other Friday off in the federal government. And I spent more time with my kids. And I got sicker. And then they sent us to go work at home during COVID. And at that point, I couldn't even function anymore. And I will be forever indebted to a doctor named Dr. Gabriela Picardo, who really saw me. And she says now that the thing that tipped her off was that my anxiety was through the roof. And I was someone who went to Princeton and Yale and worked at a big firm and made partner at that firm. You know, something was off in this person's brain, she thought. And she did a variety of tests, and one of them was a mycotoxin test. And my scores were through the roof. She said, go test your house. And she saved our life.
That's amazing, isn't it? I had the migraines too, and I don't think that people understand. It's not your traditional migraine. It is like a short circuiting in your brain somewhere. And I had visual effects. I just want to run that down so people are aware of what it feels like. I would have these migraines with these flashing lights. I wouldn't be able to move or talk or do anything for 3 days. My kids started to show signs and symptoms. And for children to start developing headaches and problems, that's when you start to understand this has got to be something poisoning you, and it needs to be in your environment somewhere. Did you notice that your kids started to change?
I mean, you're smarter than I am, because all I knew was it was COVID and we were all at home. And I suddenly thought maybe that I was some sort of super mom to really realize and be more in tune with my kids that, well, now my daughter has a visual processing disorder and she's getting visual therapy. Her behavior changed. So now we're going to family therapy. My son was regressing in his milestones. We're, now in occupational therapy and speech therapy for him. So I had therapy every day. I mean, multiple times a day with a different kid, or with myself, or with, family therapy, right? I mean, we had all the therapies going, and it did not occur to me that there was something wrong with my environment. Nor did it occur to any of the people that we were working with, wonderful people, Ivy League educated people. And it wasn't something to even consider or that we even thought. So it wasn't until Dr. Picardo said, go test your house, that I started reading about mycotoxins. And then I thought, oh, this is what is happening with my daughter, because it causes inflammation in the brain. And it's very dangerous, obviously, but it for her, it was very sudden. She was a very happy kid, and then suddenly she's violent and beating up her big brother. And, like I said, I had no context that it could be anything environmental.
That was our experience as well. Our two daughters, who were very close, were very aggressive towards each other very suddenly. And I guess for us, I thought maybe it was some medicine, maybe it was, something that we had done. So I started to immediately blame myself, naturally, as a mom would do. And that's when we started doing all of the testing and we got the PANS diagnosis. So did you feel confident that that was the cause with your kids?
Once I moved, once we figured out what was going on, so she said, go test your house. We went back, and I had a couple different mold assessors. The first one came into my house and was like, looks great. We had a beautiful house. I loved our house. It was beautifully designed. We were the second owners. We bought it from the owner, from the builder, who lived in it with his own family. Wonderful person, wonderful builder. And I say often, he didn't mean to poison our family. Like, that wasn't intentional. But he made a series of choices that did poison our family. But I didn't know that at the time. It didn't occur to me. So the second person who came in didn't get the memo that I had canceled his appointment. So I'm there, I'm in my pajamas, it's COVID time, everyone's sort of like disheveled. And he said, can I sit down? And I was like, sure. It's like pest control coming to your house and saying, can I sit down? Okay. And he starts asking about my family, and I'm like, this was just so far outside the realm of possibility. I didn't but as long as he was talking to me, I started telling him about Maddie, and he said, I often find it behind the kid most affected. And he took a flashlight to her wall, and he said, I see very faint water damage. And he took an air sample right by her wall, and he found one spore of Stachybotrys, just one. And we opened that wall, and it was completely black. And what had happened is the roofer was not there with the mason at the same time during the construction process. And as a result, the mason built the chimney without the flashing by the roofer. They need to be working in concert. So we got, that roofer deposition and asked him, now, did you know that this wasn't flashed properly? And he said, yes, I didn't flash it. And I told the builder that we had to redo it because they built it without me. And, we said, okay, well, what did he say? He said to just rig it, basically. And so it was rigged on the outside to make it look like there was flashing there. And when we went to that deposition, sir, did you know that there would be water intrusion there? Yes. Did you know that water intrusion causes water damage? Yes. Did you know that water damage causes mold? Yes. And you poisoned my family. You didn't mean to. You didn't say about that day and say, I'm going to poison this family. But that's what you did. And it turns out that he also didn't flash the rest of the house because he had been given plans for a shingle roof, and it was a metal roof. And there were a whole series, a comedy of errors that led to this entire house being full of mold. And we ultimately took the case against the HVAC company. because the builder and the roofer settled. And then we took the trial against the HVAC company. So it was a really interesting experience dealing with the legal system, dealing with lawyers, dealing with opposing counsel who are, not nice, and learning why it's so important to bring these cases. So now we have 65 active cases in Texas. I hung out a shingle. I thought I was going to represent 1 or 2 families. And in the first week, I got 1,000 calls because there is such a need for lawyers for people who have been poisoned at home, whether it's water, air, soil, construction, bad landlords. There are millions of people in this country being poisoned at home, and they're sick and they don't know why.
Yeah, I find that to be, it's so much to take in to think that one person put out one signal call and ended up with 1,000 responses. That screams problem. Here's an issue. What are we doing about it? And the building codes are just stagnant. If anything, we're making the houses tighter and not thinking about air quality and how that's going to affect the stagnant air inside the homes. And it's just expanding the issue. And then we're not allowed to talk about it. I mean, that was our experience. Was we were immediately told, don't name the builder, don't speak out, don't tell anyone this happened to you because you're going to be sued for defamation. And I don't understand how that's possible when we have Google.
Who said that?
Everyone.
Well, I don't know who you're talking to. And that is something that we really have to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's now a movement of people changing exactly that. We are out there talking day in and day out about these problems. And I am listing the companies by name. I have not been sued yet. Balfour Beatty, please sue me. We'll see, right? Like, defamation requires false statements. And when I say that Balfour Beatty isn't treating people well in Key West, it's a true statement. I have been to those houses. I go and I record and I say, well, Clark's at MacDill, another privatized military housing company, knows that those houses have a major problem. There's no vapor barrier in this entire neighborhood. And so there's mold covering every floor. They also put drip pans in the HVAC returns, which is insane. And those drip pans overflow. Rather than fixing the problem, removing the the drip pan from the HVAC, they come in and rig it every time. So you have a whole neighborhood where the drip pans have overflowed onto the moldy floor that already existed because of the lack of a vapor barrier. I'm going to call them out by name. Clark's knows that this is true. Why? Because they've been sued before in the same issue and received an expert report saying exactly this. We know they know, and we know that they're letting those families get sick. So sue me. Sue me. I'm going to continue to say it out loud, and I'm going to continue to call these bad guys out by name. And because that's what brings accountability and change. We can quietly file lawsuits, and we can do that. We do that, sure. But what made the impact in this huge Hawaii case against the United States was that we did it out loud. It wasn't just a quiet lawsuit against the U.S. Navy. I think that would have disappeared. It was every single thing we did with a press release because we wanted to tell the world what happened there. It's so important that we start paying attention to what's going on. And I think the world, this country, we are opening our eyes to big food, big pharma, big construction, big landlords, these huge institutions, including the government, by the way, that are cutting costs and cutting corners and hurting families And they know things are toxic when we do not. They know information that they do not share with us. And that's what's so problematic. So when we have the mic, we will use it and we will shout from the rooftops. And it is bringing change.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. And I think that other people need to hear an attorney speak out and say that if you are speaking truth, there is no defamation. There's no reason why you can't tell other people. And for so long, I think I also fell into that trap of thinking if I continue to work with the builder, that eventually he's going to change course. So I did give him a long leash. I did give him plenty of time. And I didn't right away put up a Google review. But then when I finally did, he had it removed. So it's like, if you're not speaking out to each other, to your neighbors, if you're not talking to the news, how would anyone else know? There's no freedom of speech on a private platform like Google, but you can speak out to the media. You can absolutely take your case forward, you know? So I think that that's very encouraging, because how else would you know that mold could do this much damage? I don't think anyone would think that ticks, Tourette's, PANS, fatigue could debilitate you the way that mold-induced ticks, fatigue can. I also wanted to ask you if, because I do have a kind of theory that COVID, us being locked down in these homes, maybe some of us had COVID, maybe some of us didn't, but this theory of long COVID, do you think that could possibly end up changing the legal landscape when people figure out that maybe they have mold-induced illness, not necessarily long COVID?
Absolutely. And I think it really did. You know, when I was diagnosed with SIRS, complex inflammatory response syndrome, and SIRS gets a bad rap. And so I'm online at the time trying to figure out, was this real or not? Seems like some sketchiness here. There's a lot of attacks online. So I went to PubMed and I started reading the medical literature myself. And I remember exactly where we were. We had evacuated up to upstate New York. And I remember looking at the screen and it sort of being fuzzy, but I was just like determined to understand it. What is happening here with our bodies? And it turns out that there's lots of medical literature on the fact that mold causes chronic systemic inflammation. SIRS itself maybe isn't a specific diagnosis, but it doesn't need to be. Does mold cause chronic systemic inflammation? If it does, then we know that that affects all these aspects of the body, right? Because inflammation is associated with depression, with anxiety, with drug use, by the way, with cancer, with heart disease, with lung disease. So if inflammation is happening in the cell at a cellular level, and then it affects all these organs in the body, your ears, your eyes, there's almost nothing that is not affected by inflammation. So if you have something causing inflammation, you can affect all the areas of the body. I had a tumor by the time I left. I had POTS. I can go on and on. But I was so sick. And when I read the medical literature myself, I really understood, yes, this is very real. This is peer-reviewed medical literature that is true. And then I started reading in newspapers around that time, long COVID is chronic systemic inflammation. Complex, and I think they call it complex inflammation, complex chronic inflammation, right? There were a few different words that they were using, but it was the same thing. Long COVID causes a cytokine storm that's an inflammatory response that affects all these parts of your body. So are some people who have long COVID, do they actually have exposure to mold or toxins? Maybe they have both. Who knows? But certainly it affects the way we talk about these things and the way that we talk about them legally. Because the bad guys, and by bad guys, I sort of mean the defense lawyers and and some good defense lawyers are good, don't get me wrong, but the ones who are trying to influence science. Science can be bought. Science can be bought. And for a long time, the bad guys bought science off when it came to Sears or mold, and they had Richie Shoemaker's license taken away. That was completely a hack job after he testified in the case. And why did they do that? Because it was bad. The truth was bad for them. So they went out to destroy the truth and to destroy people like Richie Shoemaker. So when you get all of this about Sears, right? It's now the stigma has been taken away a little bit because we don't need to talk about Sears per se. This is just chronic systemic inflammation. And it's now nomenclature in the world that we know that this is true. And all we have to do is explain it to juries, and juries understand.
I had started having this feeling like I literally started talking about this, that I thought Virginia would test the limits of free speech. I think because it goes back, and this is my theory, it's kind of a colonial thing because it's Virginia. And sure enough, like I started talking about that, they're going to test the limits. And somebody, I think in the same county as us, was sued for putting up talk to us. We built this house. It's next to these folks. It's a terrible build. It's $2.4 million defamation lawsuit. So there is an aversion to free speech, and they're willing to test those limits here. And so we saw it. And you mentioned the Texas to Virginia. I don't remember the name of the builder, but they'd done a lot of work in Texas, a large builder, and it was terrible reviews, a lot of damage. And they announced that they were going to put a lot of efforts into where? Virginia, because they've created an environment where your rights are greatly reduced. I think they've crossed the line into constitutionality and federal regulations and so forth. But part of it is this arbitration clause, which we bought in Virginia. I had a lot of business dealings with people here. We lived here for probably 10 years before we made that decision to build. And I had great relationships. I had dealt with a lot of good people. I had a high opinion of Virginia. And so I extended a bit of trust to the builder, not an unusual amount. I just thought they would respect contract law here. I thought there were limits. And so the arbitration clause, I didn't really understand the extent of what that meant. But it keeps you away, regardless of fraud, regardless of breach of contract. It keeps you from going to the public, going to a jury trial.
I don't like arbitration. I have to do it a lot in my cases. I want to be clear that there's still things you can do. For example, in Hawaii, we have to file SF-95 forms, which are claims, administrative claims. So it's private for a little while, like you file the claim and it goes to the government for 6 months. Well, we filed those, but we did it with a press release. I mean, you can file an arbitration petition and accompany it with a press release if you want to. There's no reason you can't do that. And you're just announcing out loud what has happened in this petition that you're willing to put out into the world. Is an arbitration petition defamation? An arbitration petition is bad. It's called different things at different places, but it's a demand for arbitration. It's basically like a federal a state or federal complaint. In state court or in federal court, we file a complaint, and the complaint says we're bringing this lawsuit against this builder because they violated these provisions and they made these people sick. And when I file very big cases, like my East Palestine case in Ohio and my Florida cases against these privatized military housing companies, we do it with a press release. And we file the petition, we put it on the public record, and then we announce it to the world. And the reason I do that is because I think it brings accountability, right? Part of filing these things in court is to bring it into the public light. That's part of the judicial process. You are making something public and you are filing it publicly, so it's public forever. Arbitration doesn't allow you to do that because it's a private process. But there's no problem with filing a petition. I mean, filing a press release at the same time. make it public. If that's what you want to do, if you want to educate the world about the bad things that are happening, you can do that. You can host, you're doing it right now. You're hosting this this podcast, but you can do it online. You can do it with the news media. You can do it by filing a case and then announcing that case to the world. You can even have an arbitration and put it, make a public website and just put it up there for the world. You could file a petition for arbitration and put it on social media. You could announce it on your podcast. There are all sorts of things that you can do. Now, are they going to go after with some sort of frivolous lawsuit and say you shouldn't have been talking about it on social media? Okay. I think they're going to lose that. But even so, then I'm going to be like, all right, you just sued me. Let me go talk about that.
We live in Chesterfield County in Virginia, and where that name comes from is Chesterfield cigarettes. Everyone knows this is the kind of PR that we've been dealing with here for years, so cigarettes obviously caused damage to people's health. You had Chesterfield spending tons of money to spin the PR. And now in our town, we have something called the Altria Theater, which comes from Chesterfield cigarettes. And the association is broken. So I think government spends a lot of time spinning their image, just like big companies and corporations spin their image so that they're the good guys. And then, of course, when you come up against them and you say things like, I know for a fact you did XYZ, like in our case, we found them swapping license information so that they didn't have to cite builders, not just in our case, in other cases. And they lied on the record in a public broadcast. So I asked the attorney general, I proved it. I have the documentation. I did make it public and I released it on our website. But they will spend the time saying, why are you looking into that? What do you even care? What's wrong with you? They just want to deflect and get that attention back off of them onto whoever's bringing these cases, whoever's speaking out. So it's a very scary position to be in. The stress of being pointed at, of being talked about. That's been a factor for me. I'm not a troublemaker, but when something is wrong, I'm going to do what I can legally to help other people avoid it. And that's kind of the situation that we're trying to navigate without fear. And that's why it's important to hear attorneys and other people who go through this situation say, the truth is always First Amendment.
What you're describing to me in a lot of these situations is that people defending what, let's say, is blatantly wrong. I think that institutionally, you have to be accepting that you're going to have to defend what is wrong for the institution over the people. And I think that's demonstrated over and over again. And I think anybody that would put themselves in a position where they will say, this is wrong, I won't support it, I won't condone it, even if this is my job, those people are not going to advance in those types of institutions. And to kind of reiterate that, we had at the time, the inspector or the regulatory board was one of the people that was a part of that license swap. And that individual is now the chief of staff for the Republican candidate for governor of Virginia. So that's how far it goes. And I thought to myself, we're looking at these records and we're looking at their responses and we're thinking, I can't believe you're putting this in writing, because I know nobody here is going to take it that seriously, but you're still putting it in writing, because what they're doing, it's not that they're damaging themselves by doing something to other people that's wrong. They're validating their position to move up the ladder by saying, I will go so far as to violate code, break law, ignore rights, and protect the systems, let's say, the institutions, the brand, for you. So I'm the type of individual that you want to move up. And we have a community, a culture in Virginia that it threw us off, because I'm from New York. She's from New Jersey. Sure, there's flaws, etc. We came here for a reason. We wanted lower taxes. That's what it was. And it was great for 10 years. but there's definitely a compliance culture. In our development alone, there's 30, 40 homes per the builder that have not had to meet necessarily the extent of issues we've had, but they've had contract breach, all kinds of problems. They haven't complained, not from filing a lawsuit. I don't believe they've made reviews publicly, and they won't. I think they've been taught over generations culturally to not step out, not stand up, not say something is wrong here, period.
And then
this,
that leads to the
yeah.
gaslighting, right? So I know that that's a big part of what you do is to cut through the gaslighting, the medical gaslighting and the legal gaslighting, so that you can get some sort of resolve. So what things can you offer people if they find themselves sick and they want to consider moving forward in a legal case? What sorts of things should they lock down and get ready and prepare for so that they can cut through all that gaslighting, you're crazy, it's not really happening nonsense?
Yeah. So let me just give the big picture of the gaslighting and how that happens. And Marty, I think you said it really well. They're protecting the institution over people. And that is true, right? And so what they say is there was not enough X to make people sick. Insert X here. Vinyl chloride in East Palestine, Ohio, jet fuel in Hawaii, mold in our circumstances. There was not enough X to make people sick. Therefore, if you believe you're sick, you are psychosomatic. That was the government's position in our Red Hill case that they took openly. And the reason it was so upsetting to me was because it was what they did in my own case. They said that I too was, I mean, they hired a defense expert to say that I had a somatic disorder. And I had to go back to my own doctors and say, is something wrong with me? They were so mean that they hired, Evan and I went to Princeton. We loved Princeton. And they hired a Princeton PhD to say that my parenting was unconscionable, that I should have had my daughter institutionalized. And we got that lady at deposition, though, and we asked her, do you know anything about mold? Do you have any experience in mold? No. Have you read any of the medical literature on mold? No. Have you read any of the medical literature on what mold does to the brain? No. Have you read any of the medical literature on what mold does to children? No. Then are your opinions relevant in a mold case? They didn't call her at trial. Right? They also didn't call the doctor who said that who diagnosed me with somatic disorder. Because when you looked at the actual report, it matched all the reports of my own doctors, where you could see that I had short-term memory loss and I had low processing speed. And in every neuropsych test I did, which were probably 3 or 4 in my own medical journey, I had low processing speed and short-term memory loss. And when he did his own testing, objective testing, he didn't diagnose me with malingering because I answered all the questions properly. And if you looked at the raw data, I had low processing speed and short-term memory loss. So that leads me to, if you're thinking about bringing a case like this, first of all, you're not going to be targeted the way that I was, I don't think. At least in my experience, most of my clients are not. But they will say there was not enough X to make you sick in whatever, and therefore you're a little bit cuckoo. And our answer is just the truth prevails. And I think mostly when they stand up in court, I was surprised that the government took that position all the way to trial, right? Because in my case, when they got to trial, opposing counsel pulled up the mold, like we have this diagram made of all the mold in our house, and he pulled it up and he looked at the jury and he said, I'm not going to tell you there wasn't mold in the house. And I was like, mind blown. 3 years later, you're suddenly admitting there was mold there? Wow. So they, we'll see what they do actually when they get to trial, because they're going to have to look in a jury of your peers. And they're either, I hope they make the argument that you're crazy. I hope that's the argument that they make, because the jury's not going to believe that. The jury's going to see that there was a lot of X, whatever X is, and you were not sick, and then you got exposed to it, and then you got sick, and you went to doctors, and your doctors did something called a differential diagnosis, where they ruled out other causes. And I hope you go to good doctors. And the good doctors are going to testify that, yes, I work with people who are exposed to these kinds of toxins all the time. And I see in this person's history that they were very clearly affected. Because the standard is what is more likely than not. Do you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? No. It's just what is more likely than not. And a jury's going to look at those facts and say it's more likely than not that you got sick because of this apartment or of this house or of this toxin, right? You had thousands of people who had like welts. Was that just a coincidence? You know, people had seizures. Like I had a dog who had a seizure, and I asked the judge in the Hawaii trial, was the dog psychosomatic? I mean, so that, yeah. But what we really equip our clients with over and over and over again is the truth is on your side. And when we bring our clients to trial, it's been really fun because in the past, you know, they don't want to go. They're tired. By the time they get to trial, they're tired. They wanted to settle the case. The government or whoever the defendant is, didn't offer them a reasonable number, so they have to come to trial. They think they're going to get attacked at trial. They're feeling beat down. And I will tell you that after I give my opening, they're hooked. They never want to leave the courtroom. They want to stay until the end. I've done it 3 times in the last year. By the last day of trial, they're inviting family and friends to be there because they're so incredibly proud that we brought this case for them and that we portrayed them not as a victim, not as a crazy person, but as a brave soul who took on this institution for all of us. They took it on for all of us, not for themselves, not because they're greedy, but because they care about the world we live in, and they care about your children and my children. And they want to make sure that these big builders stop cutting corners. And they want to make sure that the big landlords actually address water damage so that more people don't get sick, so that there are fewer reports of pandas. They are taking a stand for all of us, and they're proud of it. And that's how my clients feel as the case progresses. There are times it's frustrating, counsel's frustrating, judge is frustrating, whatever. But ultimately, it's this journey that they are on of owning their story and doing something with it and transforming their anger into purpose and into action. You know, transforming that pain into purpose. Right. It's really beautiful to watch, and we're so honored to get to do it.
It gives people meaning. And that's what I think you need to hold on to when you go through something like this, is where's the meaning? You don't want to think your kids have suffered and there's no hope, or you can't make a difference and stop it. That gives meaning. And I know I can feel that. I've dealt with plenty of lawyers now. We're getting battle fatigued. You know, it's a long process. But I know, I can tell that you're passionate about what you do. I know that, you know, I mean, I'm hopeful just having a conversation with you, and you're not representing me at all. So I know that makes a difference for a lot of people. And I do appreciate you coming on. I know that we've had you here for a minute, so I want to be respectful of that. But can you just give people a little direction as to where they can find you, your firm? See, there goes my molds.
My firm is called Just Well, and we represent sick families against the companies that made them sick or the institutions that made them sick. And we take every call. So we can't take every case, but we can take every call. So if you reach out to our office, we will call you back. We will give you the resources we wish we had had. We will point you in the direction to hire the independent inspector, to find good doctors. We want you to be well. Our firm is called Just Well. because we truly want people to be well. And we put our money where our mouth is in that respect. And we want people to be well, and we want there to be justice, and we want people in the world to be safer. And we've dedicated our lives to that. But, I do want to give some very practical tips too. If you are looking to build a case, build your record, put things in writing. That doesn't mean you need to go on and on and on, but just make sure you're making a written record. Hire a third-party independent assessor. Get your own testing, whether it's water or soil or some other contaminant. You're going to have a case if you get your own testing. But if you try to get the bad guys to do the testing, I promise you the bad guys' testing will reflect the bad guys' perspective, and often show that there's nothing there when we know there is. So get your own testing and be sure to document.
Well, I'm inspired. That's why I spoke. For me, this is very little dialogue. Trust me. I think there are very few people, unfortunately, that will take a stand, will go out on a limb, will be uncomfortable when there's big injustice. But the good news, I think, is that if the people that are willing to do it, go ahead and do it, well, then others will follow suit. We talked early on, and I'll leave it at this, but I remember early on we were recording early attempts, and Andrea brought up Braveheart, the movie Braveheart. And she said, I want to be like this because there are all these injustices. I want to go out and get the neighborhood and fight for the good. And I reminded her that in that movie, Braveheart ended up dead on the table. And all those people that he tried to inspire ended up basically working for the crown in the end, right? So that's the sad reality. But I think if instead of yelling at the institutional players that won't listen, we include the 10 or 15% of the people that will say no to injustice, that will give us the momentum to course correct.
Thanks for listening to Virginia Consumer. Everything shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed are personal opinions based on the individual experiences of our hosts and guests. They do not constitute legal, financial, or medical advice and do not represent the views of any affiliated individuals or organizations. Always do your own research and consult a qualified professional about your specific situation.